This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 74. The Unanswerable Irish Border Question.
Welcome to the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie, and today, Ireland and Brexit. How can the UK leave and have an open border with Ireland? It's impossible. So could this be the Achilles heel of the Brexit plan? And if the UK does go ahead, just how much is it going to hurt Ireland? That's today on the Debunking Economics Podcast.
Now, if you were to follow through on what the Prime Minister said there, you're talking about a hard Brexit. This would be catastrophic in many cases. Obviously, in the case of Ireland, as closest to Britain, would be very detrimental indeed.
That's the former Irish Prime Minister Enda Kenny giving his impression of just how much a hard Brexit is going to hurt for Britain and for the Republic of Ireland. He's also particularly concerned about the reintroduction of a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. After all, 3,000 people were bombed, murdered, killed during the unrest in the 60s and 70s. The Good Friday Agreement was to put paid to all of that, and we can't see that disappear. Surely.
We're not having a return to a hard border with customs posts because that brought with it sectarianism previously. So when Britain made this decision, this is one of the issues that had to be looked at. Now, when the Prime Minister says, I want the best deal for Britain, remember there are 27 other countries on the other side of the table.
What? And they don't want what's best for Britain as well? That sounds a bit selfish, doesn't it? But one of these countries, the one that will lose out the most probably, is Ireland. And I'll tell you what I think about all of this. I think the Ireland question, just how Britain leaves and maintains a border or not with Ireland, this question is insurmountable. And it's going to hurt Ireland, possibly more than it hurts the UK. But let's have a look at this. Ireland is actually one of the countries, Steve, that we actually have a trade surplus with. Britain imports $18.7 billion US dollars from the Republic of Ireland and exports $25.7 billion. So, yeah, that's a trade surplus of about $7 billion. So if we push up our border, and I really can't see any way not to do that. Once Britain is out of the EU, then we risk losing or, you know, at the very least diminishing that surplus. So straight away, we lose. As soon as we create that border and we put tariffs up.
That's a possible. I mean, I don't think you wouldn't necessarily have tariffs put up because trade borders are one thing and national borders are one thing. Tariff borders are another thing entirely. And we presume if one goes up, the other will, not necessarily so. You could actually have the physical border go up and have no duty to be paid as you move goods across that border. Right. That's feasible.
Yeah, it is. But although Britain might make that decision, but the EU might decide that they want those tariffs. And of course, you know, supposedly we're going to follow WTA rules and until we reach that agreement. And we're not reaching an agreement just with Ireland, of course. We are reaching an agreement with 27 countries.
Yeah, well, because we know the Europeans don't actually want a deal. They're trying to show countries inside the European Union, do not attempt to leave, otherwise you'll cop a Greek fate or a British fate. Right. And they're trying to make it as unpleasant as possible. So
there's every chance that the EU is going to say, well, yeah, there's no deal. Follow World Trade Organization regulations. So there will be a tariff between the North of Ireland and the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah, that's quite possible.
And we lose that trade surplus as a result of it. I mean, and that's the smallest part of this problem. I mean, it's pretty ugly.
It's one of the few places the UK has a trade surplus. Well, I actually wasn't aware it was that big. I didn't know it existed. I didn't know it was that big.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. Can you break down what commodities it is that we're actually exporting, having a net export surplus in? Because
I'm so glad you asked me that question because I've got it right here in front of me. You didn't think I would go into this not being prepared. So machines, computers, broadcasting equipment, stuff like that, $4 billion worth, US dollars. Chemical products, medicines, beauty products, $3 billion. Foodstuffs, also almost $3 billion, and $1.5 billion in cars and other vehicles.
That's quite interesting. So because a lot of Ireland's alleged success has been making itself into a production centre for multinationals to produce within the European Union, then export internally. But you're saying even though we are part of the EU, and UK in general runs a trade deficit with the EU, we're running a trade surplus with Ireland.
Yeah,
That's fascinating. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I think I'll be interviewing you for this one. I wasn't aware of that at all.
Well, do you want to know what goes the other way? What is Ireland exporting to the UK? And
I'll take a quick punt, and this is actually a little idiosyncratic fact that I learned. God knows where. Thanks to having interview another blog post. Is it Coca-Cola essence?
No, it's not.
Because that's the biggest physical export from the in terms of physical exports from Ireland. Republic of Ireland apparently is cocoa essence, because that's where it's manufactured by both Coca-Cola and Pepsi for export to the rest of the European Union.
Right. No, mate.
Anyway.
Yeah, foodstuffs, which would probably include that. I'm not sure. Food and drink was about 2.2 billion. But no, the biggest export to the UK is chemical products, in particular medicine, scents, sort of completed medicine. They actually import quite a lot of the chemical products that make up the medicines from France. But they package it up and make it into the medicine and then export it to the UK. That's 4 billion worth of that, plus other chemical products and lots of blood. Apparently, they send lots of blood here as well. So if you find you're starting to talk with a slight Irish accent, it's because we're getting Irish blood put into us. So that's going to have to stop, obviously. We can't have your EU blood in a post-Brexit Britain, obviously. But I mean, I think the biggest concern though for Ireland, and this is actually the main reason I wanted to raise this question, $2.5 billion worth of the exports from Ireland is meat and dairy, and of course, meat and dairy, we don't send any of that their way, so that's a one-way trip. What surprises me is that the Irish are not making a big thing out of this. Maybe they are, but we're not seeing it picked up in the media over here, because I look at that and I think this is catastrophic for Irish farmers, isn't it?
Well, there's actually quite a substantial sum, because you're talking, like, again, looking at the trade figure. I've mentioned quite a few times, like in the Atlas of Economic Complexity, and I'm just using it in an interview for the first time. And total exports to Ireland to the UK were 20.4 billion in 2010. UK to Ireland 25.6 billion. So as you say, there's about a 20% trade surplus in the UK's favour towards Ireland. I wasn't aware that was the case. But if you then break it down and say, where does most of that come from? In the UK's direction, most of the stuff that turns up is food products of various types, bakery products 1.67, waters flavoured or sweetened 1%, yada, yada, yada. But have a guess what is the biggest individual division of UK, that's a hint, exports to Ireland?
Union Jack underpants. I don't know.
Close. Yeah, it's about the same. Petroleum oils.
Oh,
yeah,
right,
about the same. Okay. 11.5%. So Scotland is, in fact, if you take that out at 11.5%, that's 2.5, roughly 2.356 to say 3 billion. So this is another reason to expect a bit of flack to come out of the Brexit negotiations. That is going to mean that, you can't not import oil, but the trade barrier going up there might make a bit of difficulty for Scotland, because they're 11.5 is petroleum oils, 5% petroleum gases. It looks like about 20% of the trade with the UK with Ireland is of exports of petroleum products from, of course, Scotland.
Yeah, well, so there we are. There's another loser right there. Scotland, if there are tariffs, is going to make it more expensive to buy Scottish oil. And look, and Irish farmers also heard of their beef exports. More than half goes to the UK at the moment. The rest of it goes to within the EU. Virtually none of it is exported outside the common market, which means they'll need to replace any lost British exports within the EU. But, they're not selling to the EU now. So why are the French suddenly going to buy more beef from Ireland? And the UK is probably going to be importing more beef from the US, replacing those Irish exports, particularly if there's no free trade agreement with the EU, but there is one with the US. I mean, that whole agricultural export sector in Ireland, I mean, it could be cut in half.
I wouldn't say being hard, but it's going to take a hit. So, and of course you say it's this classic combination of both geopolitics and economics in one, that there happens to be a border in Ireland that is there for historical reasons far more than whether they're practically or culturally necessary. And
but it's a question about protectionism, isn't it? All of this really, because I mean, the EU has been hugely protectionist for agriculture. Britain's been part of that. Ireland's been part of it. We're stepping outside, and the consequences are going to be felt by Ireland, who is so reliant on the UK as a market under this EU protectionist regime. So, does that mean the protectionism has been a bad thing, or it's been a good thing until now?
Well, I don't worry a great deal about protection, particularly. But funnily enough, I was actually at a talk last night with Nick Gruen, who's a well-known Australian economist, very nice guy, and his dad, Fred Gruen, was the person who persuaded Gough Whitlam to cut tariffs 25% by surprise overnight, and still regards as his greatest economic success. I see that as an economic catastrophe because that completely destroyed supply chains and indeed entire firms in Australia's case back 30, 40 years ago. But a 25% cut to tariffs back then was substantial. If you had a 25% increase in tariffs now, you'd barely notice it because for most goods, tariffs globally are running at about 2 to 5%. Nothing like the 20 to 40% level that used to apply. And of course, the Americans have recently slapped a tariff on, I think, on some particular Chinese export. And actually, I think it may have been a UK export of over 120%. But we're talking very, very trivial levels compared to what applied back in the 60s and 70s, because economists have succeeded in destroying tariff barriers via all these trade agreements. So, to me, it's not a major issue. It will make a slight complication. I don't think it's going to have a disastrous impact, but it will have impact given the scale of those exports. And it's the only country that I can think of where the UK is going to have a trade surplus.
Oh, so by the way, it was a threat to Bombardier in Northern Ireland, a company that makes parts for fighter jets. The threat was a 219% levy. I don't think that's gone ahead. There was just all talk. Strange that, from the President of the United States. But that's Northern Ireland. Look, I think the tariff on agriculture, it might be around 1 or 2% on average, but EU tariffs on meat imports, they're 30% or more, sometimes 70 or 90%, depending on what type of meat you're talking about. So, are we going to buy meat from the EU, from Ireland, and not impose a tariff when they're placing such a vast one on us? So we do get back to that question about Irish agriculture being hit hard and, how they're going to replace that. I mean, in theory, they could sell to the United States, but of course they're not. And the EU import tariffs, there's no way in the world that the US would let them if they're going to be have imposed such a hefty fine on their imports. So, and they do produce a lot of beef, of course, over in the United States.
Yeah, well, the US, the huge, that's the US's advantage, that enormous continental plain. The only other country that has a continental plain of the same scale, which is as productive or more, is China.
And they are going to be eyeing up the UK as a place to sell all that beef too, rather than Ireland. And there's another issue as well for Ireland. A lot of the goods that are bound for Europe travel through Britain's ports. This is the other geography question. There's a lot more roll-on, roll-off traffic, in other words, trucks, than there's the lift-on, lift-off traffic that's going through Irish ports. And then, of course, there's the so that roll-on, roll-off traffic wants to go the quickest route from Cork in the south of Ireland. The quickest way to get to Paris, for example, is not to get the ferry from Cork to France and then drive. That would take 22 hours. The quickest way is actually to go via Wales. That cuts your journey time down to 16 hours. My God, the immense amount of research that's gone into this podcast, I can tell you.
Mate, I am the amateur here. Okay, I'm just actually prompting you for more facts.
And the reason it's quicker to go via the UK is because you've got that route from Dublin to Holyhead in North Wales. It's a 3.5 hour ferry crossing. To go from Cork to Brittany, you've basically got to go around the southwest of England that juts out. That's a 14-hour crossing. That is really just about the only way you can get from Ireland to continental Europe without going through Britain. And, all of those, most of the traffic which is making its way from Ireland to Europe is going through Britain on trucks. And you've got two borders. You've got to go into Britain, and then you've got to come out of Britain. There's a huge amount of and that is the roll-on, roll-off traffic, which is the vast proportion of goods that are shipped out of Ireland go by that route. So that is an even bigger problem, isn't it? The administration and the time involved with two customs checks.
But that also implies. I mean, this is the sort of thing where you want to have some intelligent bureaucrats involved in doing all this sort of stuff. Sir Humphrey Appleby in a good mood.
I don't think they exist.
I know it's very rare, but anyway, even rarer now. But that would be a case where you'd actually want to have verification. You're going through for re-export. So you'd say this truck is not going to be it's just passing through. So therefore the goods inside are going to be sealed, and therefore there's no imposition. All you need to get is authorization that you're just using the UK as a transport corridor, and bang, you should not pay any tariffs whatsoever. This is sort of some of the stuff that should be involved in those negotiations in Brussels that are clearly not happening right now.
No, and no one is coming out with an answer as to what they're going to do about the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, how this whole solution is going to be fixed, because an invisible border is not going to work. I mean, we are going to need customs posts of some sort. Northern Ireland staying in the EU, I mean, that's been talked about. I can't see that happening. And does that then mean that Britain would still have to pay fees to the EU because part of the United Kingdom is still in the EU? And, maybe the only other alternative is a united Ireland, North and South Ireland united together. But that's not going to happen, particularly with the DUP now forming an alliance with the government. So it looks like stalemate. Yeah,
they certainly can't afford to have it happen. And that's one thing I just saying a few of my trips to Ireland, the feeling, I mean, I thought the troubles were behind us, but just even casual conversation with taxi drivers, the extent to which they still know which regions are Catholic and which regions are Protestant in that city, it's quite scary. So again, we've already had one hair trigger, which we didn't expect to see explode with Catalonia in Spain. I wouldn't want a second hair trigger in Ireland, though, of course, the way things are going with the sort of world we seem to live in now, that's reasonable odds. So you would hope this would be something that leads to unification, but it could just basically be opening up old wounds.
So given that, and I think it's going to happen, given some of the figures that we've knocked around, now you understand implicitly the trade between the UK and Ireland more than you ever have in your life.
You're dead right. Yeah.
It is going to hurt. And I'm just wondering whether this becomes, it hurts when you look at the numbers. It gets more complicated when you look at that whole border issue and transporting through the UK issue. I just wonder whether it's going to happen. I wonder whether this whole thing about Ireland is going to be the stumbling block that stops Brexit.
Well, I think I think you're right. The hard border is going to have to happen, because if you have the whole the diplomatic thing, a revolting Shenzhen visa thing, which is great for unifying Europe, it's dreadful for anybody who applies for it. Speaking from experience of friends who needed to get visas to get into the European Union, but they're going to insist on a border. It's going to be necessary. You need border checks at both sides. Whereas at the moment, it's with this peculiar situation that you do face an EU border when you go. If you fly from UK to Ireland, you do face you're going inside a Shenzhen region from a non-Shenzhen region. So we already have that partial bit of it there. But if you went from an area outside the EU to the EU itself, then that would probably extend the border for individuals and probably clearly extend it for goods as well. So,
yeah, you're not driving a truck. That's the complicating factor, isn't it? Look, we're in uncharted territory because Ireland has never been in the EU without the UK being. We joined just about the same time in 1973. New Zealand's interesting, isn't it? Here's an example of a country that was hit hard because it was trading with the UK before the UK joined the EU, and then took a hit. So in the 1950s, the UK took about 96% of New Zealand's dairy exports. Now it accounts for about 0.2%, apparently. So there's a country that, in Australia as well, I think to a great extent as well, was influenced by the fact that the UK changed its trading partnership. So I just look at that and think, well, could Ireland be the next New Zealand? Yeah. It actually turned out quite well in the long term for New Zealand, but it took a while.
Yeah, and it could be the same thing for Ireland. Partially you mentioned the port issue. That might be something. But you can't physically change that. Bristol gets in the way, so there's no way to make it cheaper to do the expanding the port system. You still face that increase in time. Maybe it might be something about improving sea transport compared to land transport. But yeah, I can still see it's.
Could it be could this all be the sticking point? I still have a theory, and you and I see we're completely at odds here. I agree that there's a huge bumbling bureaucracy that sits within the EU, and Jean-Claude Juncker just makes matters worse. But even despite all that, I think Britain is better off being part of the EU rather than being out of it. And I'm just looking and thinking, could this be the stumbling block? Could it actually be that this is an insurmountable question, this whole Ireland situation, and no one has an answer to it. And so you then got the choice. Well, maybe we just have to back out of it, or Ireland has to come out too.
Which is the other possibility, because my reason for voting for Brexit was that
you wanted it all to fall apart. That's what.
It's like time it collapsed, because it was a bad idea in the going beyond just the idea of trade and trying to form economies of scale by reducing trade barriers and not needing customs duties at different national borders. That was reasonable. Making it a single currency and then having all the rules on the currency, the Lisbon Treaty and the Maastricht Treaty limits on government spending. That's what caused this to be not an economic success, but an economic basket case. So I always want to throw the basket away. But if you threw it away and you went back to the idea of having, standardized customs arrangements, being inside effectively a free trade zone, and therefore trying to exploit economies of scale on an American level, which is what the original intention was, that would be worthwhile. But these things never happen in a neat and tidy way. And I knew of, obviously Spain being a classic instance of anything but neat and tidy, and here's Ireland is another instance of it.
But you are a supporter of protectionism, in that protectionism can help within a country. For example, it can help you to develop a diversified economy, and we've spoken about that in the past.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not opposing. I'm in favour of what matters most is investment, not specialisation. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And if this, for example, some of these things we're talking about with Ireland might force Ireland to develop its own. You couldn't build. How far? You probably know. How many kilometres is it from Ireland to Calais to France? It must be. It's not 1,000, but it must be hundreds. You're not going to build a tunnel across there.
No, because Cornwall gets in the way. It probably is about 1,000 kilometres actually to go from Cork to Le Havre, I should imagine, on the north coast in Brittany and France. But yeah, conveniently, Britain is in the way. Again.
How unusual that is.
That's right. It took years to build that extension to the southwest of England. But the question is, I guess, when you start looking at protectionism, do you then say, well, okay, what are the benefits of a trading bloc? I mean, I'd say, if it's deemed to be an area that's protected, then you're just extending your geographic boundaries a bit, aren't you? And you're saying, well, okay, for example, there's nowhere in the world we're ever going to be able to grow oranges in Britain because the climate's not up to it. So let's include a country that can. Maybe and so that's why the European Union as a trading bloc makes sense to me. You're just like treating it as one country in terms of the area that you're protecting, but you're allowing for diversity, which is driven largely, I guess, by climate.
Yeah, and that's again why you need to have something like the Americans develop, whether they intended to or not, whether Washington is by far the dominant political element of the government system and the states are minor, and your money is paid out of Washington rather than out of the states. That could have been the model for the European Union if they'd made that decision back in the 1950s, 1960s. But because of the focus upon discipline, that's part of the whole design of the euro, courtesy of the ordo-liberal sect that Schäuble belongs to from Germany, you haven't had that equalisation. So they've got half of what you need to get economies of scale, half of what you could have used to do both the internal specialisation that you're talking about there, that I also think makes sense, while getting the geographic economies of scale, but they've stuffed it. So, and this is the Irish situation is yet another instance of how it's been stuffed.
Yeah, and will be even more stuffed by pulling it apart.
But at the same time, I mean, I actually had a very interesting conversation on the weekend in Madrid at a conference I spoke at there, which is called the Common Action Forum. But part of it was talking to a woman who was an astrophysicist by career and then became a finance minister for Estonia. And of course, Estonia has broken away from Russia, but is now trying to become part of the European Union. And when I asked her what the population of Estonia was, I got rather a surprise. Let's see, do you know this factoid? What's Estonia's population?
Oh, I doubt. Very, very.
Gotcha.
4 million?
I didn't know.
How many?
I didn't. 1.35.
Right.
So that's a bit too small for economies of scale. And I can see why they want to join in. They wanted to get away from Russia and then join into the European Union. And actually, they're joining the euro as part of this. And I was saying that's an extremely bad decision. Join the European Union. Please do not join the euro. But you can see the same desire for economies of scale, but being hit at the same time by nationalism in the opposite direction.
So
we've got ourselves a mess. We've got ourselves one hell of a mess.
We have. I mean, the ideal for me would be that we forget about the euro. The EU says, "Oh yeah, that was a bad idea." That they say actually we're a bit too big as well. Let's get rid of some of these. Let's get rid of half the countries because we don't need the economies of scale quite to that extent. And then Britain says, "Oh, on that basis, we'll all come back in." But that is a fantasy world, isn't it? I wonder whether
particularly getting rid of the countries, running the borders is a different story. Countries,
I'm not talking demolishing them. I'm not talking about going Trump-like in and annihilating them. But just removing the border. But I also wonder, whether the answer to the Irish question is that Ireland does actually say, well, yeah, we're going to pull out of the EU too, and Britain's first free trade agreement is with Ireland.
That's quite possible, and there might be a better way to go.
We'll wait and see, but I still think it could be the stumbling block. There's no answer to this, is there? I actually doubt we are ever going to leave. I think we'll be dead before it happens.
Yeah, I think more likely it's going to die on us. This is the other side, because what's happening with Spain, I mean, the two parties that are pushing for separatism most strongly in Catalonia, one is right-wing and the other is a bunch of anarchists who were, not that I'm totally against anarchy, but they were guerrillas at one stage, and they're quite happy to go back to that if forced. So we'd like to see military conflict within countries as a prelude to whatever's decided about the continuation of the European Union.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I think that's going to take longer than the Brexit supposedly the timetable for Brexit negotiations. It does look like Britain is going to leave with a hard Brexit, and we get back to Ireland. I think they may be the people who suffer the most out of it.
Yeah, well, this one I've got to say I don't know. I've got to take your opinion as being the ending point of this conversation.
It's got to happen once. I could be completely wrong, of course, but I love the feeling for once that I've got the last word.
There you go.
Good to talk, Steve.
Okay, mate. Bye bye.
I really can't see no solution to this. I mean, there has to be a border, which means vehicles are going to have to be stopped. Which is, they do that between Norway and Sweden, by the way. Not every vehicle, but the traffic crossing the border there is not transiting in and out of the EU on the same journey. So that makes it a bit simpler. Whereas if you're transiting through Britain and, Steve's idea that you need to mark it up as just traffic in transit, all those vehicles have to be stopped. Even so, between Norway and Sweden, there's about 250,000 vehicles stopped every year. There's 10,000 lorries and vans crossing the Northern Ireland border every day. So even if there were no tariffs, so even if there was a deal done with the EU, you've still got the administration and the cost and the time disadvantage of having a border dealing with that much traffic. And I suspect that's why nobody has come up with a solution to this one, because there isn't one. Easy to figure out how much we're going to pay the EU to leave, but the Irish border question, unanswerable. Well, next time, a little less of me and more of Steve. I'll get back to asking the questions. I'll be back in my box when we ask, competition, is it always a bad thing? Isn't collusion sometimes a better result? And does that mean that one of the basic tenets of capitalism, competition, is flawed? That's next time with the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. I'll see you then. Thanks for listening.